Okay, so the first thing we're going to do on 19 is change all this to sine and cosine. So the reciprocal of cosecant is 1 over sine, the reciprocal of secant is 1 over cosine. We're just going to let this minus cosine hang on out here. And I'm going to find the LCD. The LCD of all of these denominators in this complex fraction. So I'm looking at all of these denominators. So the LCD is those multiplied together, which is going to be sine x times cosine x. And we're going to multiply that by the top and the bottom. So on the top, we're going to distribute it to this part. This is going to be sine x cosine x. When I distribute it over to this part, this sign will reduce with this sign, and I'll have plus cosine x. And then down here on the bottom, when I just take this times this cosine, that cosine, and that cosine reduce, and I'll have that over sine x. And I still have minus cosine x over here. On the top, I have a GCF of cosine, so I'm going to factor that cosine out. And let's see, when I take cosine out, it's going to leave me a sine x plus 1. And I'm going to have a minus cosine over here. So let's see, I think I'm going to take, I think the fastest way to do this. Yeah. Okay. I can get to where I'm going, but it's going to take several more steps this way. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to get a common, instead of factoring this thing out, I'm going to get a common denominator so that I can just put all the numerators over the common denominator up here. So this is over 1, and out of these two, the common denominator is sine. So I need to multiply this thing by sine x over sine x to get a common denominator. Now my common denominator for this whole thing is sine x. And now I can add the like terms on the top, which when I add the like terms is this sine x cosine x and this negative sine x. Oops, I put that wrong. That should be sine, sorry. And it's not ready. There we go, sine x. So this positive sine x cosine x cancels out with this negative sine x cosine x. So I get cosine over sine, which is cotangent x, which is my answer. There's a way faster way. If you want me to show you in class, I will. Over here, I'm going to FOIL these two. So 1 times secant is secant x. 1 times negative tangent is negative tangent x. Sine times secant is positive sine x secant x. And then sine times negative tangent is negative sine x tangent x. And now I'm going to change all of these into sine and cosine. Okay, so if you look at these two right here, these both have a common denominator of cosine, and this is a positive sine over cosine, negative sine over cosine. Those cancel out, that's 0. So here I've got 1 over cosine x, and I've got plus, oops, sorry, that should be a minus, not a plus, because that was a positive times a negative, so that's a negative max. So I'm going to change the sign there. So the minus sine squared over cosine x, and you already got a common denominator. So that's going to be 1 minus sine squared all over cosine squared, 1 minus sine squared x over cosine x. And that is a Pythagorean identity, which is cosine squared x. And 1 cosine on the bottom reduces with 1 on the top, and that whole thing is cosine x.